Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone in this room. Welcome, everyone who's watching us online, our virtual audience. We have waited, and we're here. It's a great miracle and a joy, a blessing from God. I'm Peter Bouteneff, and together with my colleagues Harrison Russin and Talia Maria Sheehan, we've been working to organize this event, and it's impossible to express our joy that it is now beginning. To welcome you, my additional joy is to invite my dear President, Father Chad Hatfield, to welcome you to St. Vladimir Seminary. This event is co-hosted by the Seminary and by the ISOCM, the International Society for Orthodox Church Music. And Father Ivan Moody, our speaker tonight, will, when he zooms in after the lecture, say some words on behalf of the Institute. But on behalf of St. Vladimir's, Father Chad Hatfield.
Thank you, Peter, very much. And it really is our joy to be able to welcome you physically on campus and also those who are joining us virtually. This is a remarkable thing to sort of witness over the last several years, even during the pandemic, the kind of rebirth of the summer symposium. It had a gap in our history for a period of time. But it's back strong, and we expect to see it keep building. Not just simply numerically, but in the ways in which we're able to serve the church, serve your parishes, your missions, because that's really at the heart of what we do here at St. Vladimir's. We exist to help you create healthy and strong missions and parishes. We're a very international institution, and this conference reflects that kind of the international flavor of St. Vladimir Seminary. You look at the international stature of the faculty represented here, the lecturers, and of course the guests. And I know I'm scanning the room, we have one who's come all the way from Norway. It also reflects what's increasingly more significant in theological education, and that is collaboration. Collaboration with our sister seminary, St. Tikhon's in Pennsylvania. We have someone representing the Greek Archdiocese and that tradition. We have one OCA choir director. It's very diverse, lots of collaboration going on here. I'm very pleased to tell you that the future of music at St. Vladimir Seminary is very bright. Something that's sort of going to be breaking news, as they say, and you can put it on your calendar and tune in, because we're really delighted. Alex Lingus, that you all know from A Cappella Romana, will be visiting faculty in residence here in the spring semester of this coming academic year. We're also able to offer now a Master of Arts degree with an emphasis in the sacred arts, both visual and from the music side. If you don't know about that, speak to Professor Bouteneff and he'll fill you in from top to bottom. There's a growing interest in this area, and much of that, as you know, is motivated by the fact that in the church we keep talking about the fact that there is a vocations crisis. That's often centered around priesthood, but the truth of the matter is, in the various ministries in the life of the church, we have a vocations crisis, and church music is part of that crisis. We actually now receive seminarians who have had zero exposure to music in their elementary education or anything higher, because it gets eliminated from school systems across the country. It's remarkable. So we have a lot of work to do. But this vocation shortage means that we have to do a better job of preparing church musicians, choir directors, composers, every aspect of this significant part of church life. And that's everything from teeny tiny missions with 10 people in Wide Road, Montana, and I have nothing against Montana, I love Montana, but also some of the bigger cathedral churches. And we're going to be learning at this particular symposium, how do we adapt to these various situations that we now find ourselves in. Finally, I'd just like to thank God for the great foundation we stand on here musically. I would err if I tried to highlight everybody who's been a contributor to this foundation. But certainly this evening, I think many of us are remembering Father Sergei Gogolov of blessed memory, who contributed so much to us. How can we not speak of Dr. Dave Drillock, who, again, has had a hand on probably most of you in this room in one way or another, either by him himself or by those he has trained through the years. I had a particular delight just this past week. An alumnus came on campus. He graduated in 1983 and had not been back to St. Vladimir since. He told me that he was part of the early Byzantine choir here in the days when His Grace Bishop Basil of Wichita was, in fact, the Byzantine music instructor. So when we were in the Leonti building, he said to me, you know, the first cassette tape of Byzantine music recorded at St. Vladimir Seminary that was sold was recorded in the men's room in the Leonti building. So there's a piece of history there that I didn't know. We also have interesting projects outside of Eastern Orthodoxy. The seminary is working with one of our graduates and with SVS Press on a Coptic music project, which I guarantee you'll be very, very interested to have in your hands as soon as we have it into production. So again, welcome, enjoy your time here. I know all of you got an impact report, which will give you a little more history about what we're doing here at the seminary. There are extras, so take one for your best friend and share with everybody about the greatness of this particular conference when we're finished, and we'll at least double or triple the number of people physically here next year. Again, many thanks and welcome.
Glad Father Chad spoke for a little bit. I feel like I'd like to lean into my role as host this evening and just say a few things too. For one, I'm immensely proud to have been associated with St. Vladimir Seminary for most of my life and to be teaching here for the last 22 years. And I've got a few years ahead of me, and they're the best ones yet. A few years ago, Nick Reeves and I think many of you know Nicholas Reeves, sat at the bottom of the hill there. It was 2011, and it was like a 4th of July barbecue, and we thought, you know something? Arvo Pärt. What if we got him over here? And what if we did like a concert? Where? Carnegie Hall, come on, you know, it's like, yeah, sure. And one of the amazing things about St. Vladimir Seminary is when Nick and I came to Father Chad, he said, sounds great, let's go to Estonia. It's just like, that's who he is, and that's the climate here of let's face it, that's an adventure. It's kind of crazy. And literally within months, Nick, Father Chad, and I were on a plane in December to Tallinn, and we were in Tallinn meeting with Arvo and Nora Pärt on the day of Father Alexander Schmemann's death in the city of his birth, Tallinn, Estonia. And with that was born the Arvo Pärt project, where it expanded beyond concerts and into, you know, Arvo and Nora said, you know, we need people to mediate my music to the, what does Orthodox Christianity have to do with it? And you know, we need this as much as anybody. So, well, Nick and I were like, okay, we'll try. And so on the heels of all that was born the Institute of Sacred Arts, which, again, I've felt nothing but support from Father Chad and from our dean, Alex Tudoria, who will also welcome you at some point during these days, who's been an unstinting support of our work here. So that's just been a tremendous joy. When I asked colleagues a few years ago, what do you all want us to do in and for the seminary? And I remember Melanie Ringa and several others. She was one of the strongest voices. bring back the Summer Institute. Okay, this was called for decades the Liturgical Institute of Music and Pastoral Practice, I think it was. I think that's how you first heard of the seminary, right, Harrison? Yeah, and so this was an annual event. Many instrumental people in that, Father Alexander Schmemann, Dave Drillick, Helen Erickson, Mark Bailey, Psalm, and it became kind of the go-to event every year in June for church musicians, mostly of kind of the OCA stripe, but increasingly of different musical traditions. And so we've tried to bring it back. Then a little thing called COVID hit, and we pivoted to online, and here we are again. And it's just, I think we all feel the real great joy of being in each other's company, and an event that was planned together so closely in collaboration with St. Tikhon's through Talia Sheehan, through St. Vladimir's, with Father Ivan, who's endlessly affable and experienced hands. All of this came together with such a spirit of collaboration, cooperation, and joy. So that, together with an amazing tech staff that we have here at the seminary, a new events person here that we have at the seminary, it's all come together by God's grace. And it's come together in a completely new way. For one, the collaboration with the International Society of Orthodox Church Music, but also in the room today, present physically, are some of the real movers and shakers of Orthodox church music in America over the past decades. But also in the room today, equally important, are people who, I wouldn't be surprised if you're less than 20 years old, and people in their 20s and 30s, people of every generation, like every letter of the alphabet generation is in the room. And everybody's voice is equally important in moving us forward on this theme of music in the service of liturgy. Cute little title there, yeah, liturgy is a service, but in the service, like what kind of music, because we as church musicians and conductors and singers, we have a say in choosing repertoire from different traditions in many cases, and even within traditions of different complexity, of different vintage, of different ethos, of different tonalities. So what would work to bring the experience of the liturgy and the service of God in the church, what would be this, pleasing incense that is offered in the form of music? So that's something that I don't think we're going to have that question nailed down by Saturday, but that's the theme that accompanies us, and that's what we're going to try to find some creative and useful ways forward with you here present and with you online. We have a wonderful, diverse collection of people online as well. And again, through our tech staff, the online component of this event is going to be very full of value. It's not going to be just another kind of like Brady Bunch Zoom meeting, right? You already see, I imagine, many angles and zooming, like not Zoom, but like Zoom. So it's going to be good, and the sound quality, we hope, is going to be very good. So thank God for all of that. Now I can introduce our first keynote speaker. Father Ivan Moody is many things, and it's one of the great joys of my life to call him a friend. I think many people in the room can call him a friend, and that's because no matter how world-renowned he is as a composer, as a conductor, as a scholar, he is an immensely kind, and immensely helpful and approachable human being, which doesn't always happen in life. It doesn't always happen among musicians, church musicians. No, but seriously, that's Father Ivan, and I think even in his words to us in his recorded lecture, as well as when he zooms in for the Q&A, I think you'll all see that immediately. As I mentioned, Father Ivan Moody is a world-renowned composer, conductor, and scholar. He studied at the universities of London, Joensuu, and York. His music has been performed and broadcast and recorded by renowned performers, including Paul Barnes, the BBC Singers, Capella Romana, the Estonian Philharmonic Chamber Choir, the Huiferts Trio, Hilliard Ensemble, Norwegian Soloists Choir, Arturo Pizarro, Raphael Wallfisch, and the Tallis Scholars. His largest works to date include Passion and Resurrection, the Akathistos Hymn, the Dormition of the Virgin, and Kohelet. As a conductor, he has worked with choirs and choral ensembles all over Europe and in the USA, concentrating particularly on contemporary sacred music and repertoire from the Balkans. As a musicologist, he has published widely on the music of the Balkans and the Iberian Peninsula and Orthodox sacred music. He's contributed to Grove, Die Musik in Geschichte und Gegenwart, the Canterbury Dictionary of Hymnology, and the Cambridge Companion to Stravinsky. And his book, Modernism and Orthodox Spirituality in Contemporary Music, was published in 2014. And he's currently engaged on a number of research projects dealing with music in the Mediterranean and the Balkans. He's a research fellow at CESEM in Universidade Nova Lisbon, and a proto-presbyter of the Serbian Orthodox Church in Portugal. Another of his contributions with global impact, especially for the Orthodox Church, is that Father Ivan is chairman of the International Society for Orthodox Church Music, which is co-sponsoring this event. His lecture this evening is entitled Scale and Diversity, Contextual Considerations on Orthodox Church Music. He's prepared a lecture that he has recorded, which we will view together. It's about 35 minutes, I believe, after which he will miraculously appear on the screen. It'll be about 2 a.m. in Estoril, Portugal, so we'll be kind to him. But I look forward, and I think we can press play. Please welcome Father Ivan.
Good evening. The title of my paper is Scale and Diversity, Contextual Considerations on Orthodox Church Music. The chanters were but two. The harmony was inverted. Cadences never arrived. One felt that if one never again heard a final chord with the lower voice on G and the upper on E, it would be too soon. Or, the chanters were but two. There was no harmony, other than the occasional eson or doubling in the thirds. The austere simplicity of the music reflected the grandeur of the ritual. To be more specific, in this first case, we have a causal chain with which I imagine a number of you are very familiar. Because the music was intended for a four-part choir, but there were only two voices, here soprano and tenor, the root of any given chord was only fleetingly present, and never at cadential points. I will not identify the perpetrators in the particular case I'm thinking of, but we have all surely heard such things where there are insufficient voices to sing St. Petersburg court chant well. And it is the kind of music that must be sung well or not at all. If you have only two voices, two singers, then extract the chant-bearing voice and sing in unison or add thirds, or use a monophonic repertoire, again I have specific occasions in mind. Of course, it is easy to say this. In reality, these kinds of things happen because church choirs have inherited libraries of material from previous generations, generally in ever more faded photocopies of photocopies, or even Gestetner or spirit duplicated copies in hideous mauve ink, if anyone remembers those. And these are the things that people are used to hearing. The power of the what people are used to factor cannot be overestimated, and it is one of the chief reasons, obviously, for the great difficulty a music director in a parish often has in introducing any new repertoire, even if only on an occasional basis. These comments are by way of introduction, but they go in many senses to the heart of the question I've been asked to talk about from the point of view of my own experience. And if an entire repertory of chant can be compromised in this way, simple enough though court chant is in technical terms, what does it mean for other kinds of chant and for larger scale or otherwise more elaborate pieces? What is the significance of elaborate church music? In what way is it elaborate? Answers to this second question will, unsurprisingly, vary according to repertoire. For a Byzantine chanter, a communion hymn by a composer, such as John Cucuzelis, is elaborate, its melodic complexity demanding precision of tuning, complete breath control, and mastery of vocal phrasing. For a Serbian chanter, an example might be the setting of O Tebe Radojecia included in Mokranjec's collection Opšte Pojanje. For users of Russian monophonic chant, there are plenty of highly ornamented communion hymns in such well-known publications as the Sputnik Psalomshchika, little used though they generally are. For the harmonized choral repertoire, the elaboration is likely to be vertical rather than horizontal. involving divisi in the voice parts and challenges in terms of tuning and coordination, such as those encountered in the work of composers from the Russian-Ukrainian Baroque, or by Chesnokov, Kostalsky, Rachmaninov, Hristich, Konyevich, Lungu, or Kilescu, not to mention work by more recent composers, to which we shall return. As to the first question, the significance of elaborate church music, there are at least two possible reasons for the composition of such. Firstly, one may require a longer composition in order to cover a liturgical action, and the cherubic hymn is the classic example of this, of course. The chanting having to cover the time during which the priest, with or without a deacon, says a prayer, senses, recites the cherubic hymn 3 times, places the air around his shoulders, and takes a chalice and paten, waits, one hopes, for the chanting to cease, and then goes around the church, in some traditions, or at least comes out in front of the iconostasis, makes commemorations, and then enters the altar once more. Secondly, elaborate church music may be required for the joyful celebration of a feast day, on which it may be expected that settings of certain hymns will be of greater musical sophistication than on a day with no particularly resonant commemoration, a more complex setting of the anaphora, say, or the communion hymn. And the church choir may well have been working on these complex settings in rehearsal, eager to perform them in their liturgical context. So far, so good. But as we all know, the actual conditions of modern parish life often present this often prevent this seemingly logical situation from occurring in quite this way. As I suggested above, very often this results from an ambition that does not correspond to the actual musical capacities of the chanter or choir concerned. Leaving aside any aesthetic questions, it is the case that Tchaikovsky's liturgy and Rachmaninoff's vigil service are rarely performed liturgically precisely because they are technically very difficult. Similarly, grandiose Serbian choral compositions, such as Stevan Hrčić's Opelo or Mokranjaci's Strasna Sedmica, Passion Week, are far beyond the great majority of parish choirs. It would seem obvious, therefore, not to attempt to perform these pieces if one's choir is not technically first class. However, just as with concert choirs, the desire to perform the jewels of the repertoire is not easily suppressed. A phenomenon also related to ignorance of much other repertoire, or the assumption that it is not as famous as these works, and therefore not really worth singing, and choirs often attempt repertoire that is beyond them. I do not mean, incidentally, to disparage musical ambition, the idea of improving standards, in saying this. It is simply that ambition must be measured against reality, and in the context in question, that also includes the dignified execution of the rituals established by the rubrics in the Church's Typikon. It is also easy to adduce examples from the Byzantine repertoire, by the way, as anyone who has heard a less than capable chanter destroying a slightly unfamiliar cherubic hymn or the Troparion of Kassiani on Holy Wednesday will tell you. The conflict between ambition and capacity is precisely the same. Simplification ho, you cry. The choir's rubbish, so we have to sing second-rate, boring things. Well, no, actually. There are various points to make here, but the first and most important is that simplicity is not a synonym for boredom. The fact that a particular piece may not require stratospherically high sopranos, or the constant employment of octavists, or that it is only in 4 real vocal parts rather than 6 or 8, or that it is not composed of endless melodic roulades that would make even the most dedicated chanter fall asleep at the Kliros, does not mean that it is without interest. And underlying this point is the question of what the music is actually for. Are we really in church, at a liturgical service, to show off our voices, or our magnificent ensemble, or even, perish the thought, our choir robes? Where do such notions fit into the proper execution of the liturgical cycle of humility before God, or even normal, decent Christian behaviour? I exaggerate for effect, of course, but I fear not much. But let us assume that we bite the bullet and decide that we must use simpler music because the choir just can't hack it. Parishioners are complaining, the choir director is frustrated, the priest is constantly peering out of the holy doors to find out just what is going on at the Kliros, so distracting has it become for him. The choir director looks for simpler music. Where might such stuff be found? Well, if you are a Byzantine chanter or a Serbian chanter, you have plenty of sources from which to choose, both in print, assuming you have access to sources in Greece or Serbia, and online, even these days in English, thanks to the work of John Michael Boyer, Samuel Heron, Nikola Resanovic, and many others.
Strong, you will also
And the way in which a chanter is traditionally educated begins from the singing of one note well. People think that maintaining the ison is easy. It is not. It requires a rock-like stability, knowledge of the modes, and the ability to hear the acoustical resonance between your own voice and the melodic voice. Once you have learnt to do that, you can progress slowly and sometimes fitfully and painfully until you know the scales. Then you can build the rest on that. Serbian chant is in fact not taught like that, but on the basis of the memorization of melodies, which in turn may come from a number of different sources, Vokranjac, Svej, Barački, etc. And the more Western your repertoire, the more that will be the case, even if you know the modes. Nevertheless, my point remains, there is a simpler repertoire accessible to everyone that fits and serves the dignity of the services, but again, it needs to be sung well. If one starts from the position that it is easy and does not require rehearsal, nothing essentially will change, because what needs to change even more than repertoire is attitude. If you want to sing Russian chant and are happy with the antiquated notation, the Sputnik Psalomshchika contains a wealth of material, though it is a book I see but rarely these days. And for English, one could hardly do better than Benedict Sheehan's A Common Book of Church Hymns, which includes the Sputnik amongst its sources, and usefully contains a carefully considered introduction of harmonizing monophonic melodies. And one could always compile one's own parish Sputnik, of course. This is in fact what I have done over the course of the years in my parish in Estoril, Portugal. The parish is cosmopolitan and multilingual, and the number of chanters available is highly variable, for reasons I shall explain shortly. So the choir folder contains what one might describe as a tapestry of monophony, some Byzantine, in Western notation for practical reasons, some Znameni, some Serbian, in Greek, Slavonic, Portuguese, sometimes some Romanian, and, since the advent of broadcast services necessitated by the pandemic, an increasing amount of English. It is salutary to hear how well these can fit together. There is also the option of harmonization. If there are enough singers for such a thing to happen, there is, so to speak, a second layer of repertoire for that purpose. Of course, the famous dictum about not taking one's typicon to another monastery applies equally at parish level. I would not dream of insisting that a system that works well in this particular case could be universally applicable, and this is to do with context. All parishes have a context. They have, so to speak, a founding myth. Do not forget that in the liturgy, in the augmented litany after the Gospel, we pray for the blessed and ever-memorable founders of this holy house. And there is a subsequent history built on that founding myth. These things are important. They root a parish, give it identity and strength. I have written elsewhere of my dismay at seeing a new priest or bishop come into a parish and completely sweep away its traditions, whether they be icons, music, or vestments, and utterly destroy its sense of actually being that parish, with its particular history, with its particular connection to its blessed and ever-memorable founders. Quite simply, this should not happen. There needs to be respect for the way the parish has developed and struggled to continue to exist, and there is almost certainly going to be something in that still present history that the new priest dislikes, whether a particular musical style, or the music of a particular composer, or the use of an organ, for example. But we as individuals are not the church. The church is a community. The church is communion. This cannot exist if it is possible to eliminate the parish's identity on a whim, however theologically grounded that whim may seem to be. The first person from whom I learnt anything substantial about Orthodox chant, the ever-memorable Archpriest Michael Fortunato, knew this very well. He had inherited the choir of the Cathedral of the Dormition in London from his father-in-law, Mikhail Feokritov, and had that background to work with. He was also fascinated by Znameni and other kinds of Russian chant, but he knew that he could not throw out the things people loved. On my observing how much I disliked Makarov's setting of Angel Vopiache, he noted that if he changed it, he would be beaten to death by babushkas. And thus only occasionally was he able to incorporate a monophonic Znameni hymn into a service, much to at least one of the other priests' disgust. You cannot win, but you can compromise. This is part of a mature Christian attitude to such questions. And were it not so, we would not have a church at all. When my wife and I moved to Portugal in 1990, the only regularly functioning church was a non-canonical one. So we were reduced to Christmas and Pascha served by a visiting Greek priest, and subsequently occasional Russian liturgies. When things became organized under the Ecumenical Patriarchate, the parish that was the predecessor of the one I now serve had by necessity to be cosmopolitan and multilingual. None of the Greeks could sing. The only people who could sing were Russians and my wife and me. But they all got used to the Greek language, and what was by then quite a large Greek congregation also got used to hearing things in Slavonic and Portuguese. This is why I had to develop my parish Sputnik, and when I was ordained priest, I kept this model for the parish to which I was assigned, and we still have no Greeks who can sing. I mentioned above that the number of chanters is highly variable. This is because my parish became a victim of its own success. We received Orthodox from all over the world, and eventually priests from other jurisdictions came, so that there are now Romanian, Russian, Moldovan, and Bulgarian parishes, and, under the Ecumenical Patriarchate, a very large number of Old Calendar Ukrainian parishes. Curiously, even though I am now in the Serbian Church, my parish remains the only one in Portugal to follow the Greek typikon and use Greek regularly in services. So the chanters started to help out in these other parishes, with the result that where once I might have counted on a small choir of 7 or 8 people, I might these days have only 2 or even 1, and that, I think, fully justifies my parish Sputnik. There are parishes in other countries in Europe and the United States which naturally face different challenges. One of the most fascinating cases in this respect is Finland. Some of you will, I hope, be aware of the work done by composers such as Pekka Ahtiainen, 1885 to 1956, Boris Yakubov, 1894 to 1925, and Peter Milolubov, 1918 to 2004, and their settings for the Orthodox Church in the Finnish language. And a representative sample may be found on the CD Arctic Light by Capella Romana under my direction. But there are a number of other recordings not easily obtained outside Finland. What one sees in their work is an astounding technical competence and inventiveness, resulting in large part from the fact that their compositions were conceived in the first place for the Finnish language, rather than being adaptations from settings in Slavonic. This has led to their being seen, whether in a negative or a positive sense, as monuments of the history of Finnish Orthodox Church music. On the other hand, the reaction in many quarters to much plainer music, St. Petersburg court chant arranged to Finnish translations, the first anthology for liturgy in four-part harmony in Finnish was published in 1894, has brought about to some extent a revival of monophonic chant, especially Znameni and Byzantine. Thus, Finland may be experiencing the opposite extremes of the post-Rautovala Panechida of Mikko Sidorov and an entirely different approach, monophonic singing, that has a long-established tradition in churches elsewhere in the world, or that has at least historical precedent reinforced by musicological research, and which has been shown to be viable in the Finnish liturgical context. The research and teaching of Professor Hilkka Seppälä and the recent practical work of Father Damaskinos Olkinuora are two of the most obvious contributing factors to this reevaluation of tradition. It is also important to be aware of the existence and significance of the so far unexamined Karelian pneumatic manuscripts held in Helsinki University Library and the Kuopio Church Museum, indicating as they do the further reaches of the Orthodox past on both sides of Karelia's border.
Onnea olkoon Isälle ja Pojalle ja Pyhälle Hengelle, pyhänesi paimenemme nektarioksen rukouksien tähden. Armollinen puhdista meidät monista synnestämme. Nyt ja aina ja iankaikkisesta iankaikkisen aamen. Jumalan synnyttäjän rukouksien tähden. Armollinen puhdista meidät monista synnestämme. Armahda minua Jumala suuressa armossasi, pyyhi pois minun rikkomukseni, suuren lapeutesi tähden. Isä, esi,
The point I am making here is that the tradition had to be invented in the sense of discovered, and one can say the same of Finnish iconography as well as church music. There is no clear line leading back to Byzantium, only the spread of Orthodoxy throughout Karelia after the cessation of hostilities between Sweden and Russia in 1809, though the history of Orthodox Christianity in Finland in fact goes back to the 12th century, when traders came from Novgorod. When in 1921 Patriarch Tikhon granted the Finnish Church autonomy, the Finnish Synod decided, in view of the desperately difficult situation, to be taken under the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople. This happened in 1923, resulting in an autonomous church of Russian tradition under a Greek patriarchate, worshipping in Finnish. As such, the Finnish Church might be thought to be paradigmatic of the Orthodox presence in the West during the 20th and 21st centuries, and the variety of approaches taken musically to adapt to this situation is fascinating and thought-provoking. But once again, that situation is unique. Things were very different for Orthodox communities in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, which countries underwent the experience, of course, of being absorbed into the Soviet Union. Though I possess no DeLorean, it is my conviction that in order to progress to the future, we must go back. That is to say, to use a quotation possibly from George Santayana, that is now so ubiquitous as possibly to have lost all meaning, those who cannot remember the past are doomed to repeat it. If we apply it here, we can see that it is something important to teach us. We need, in order to continue Orthodox worship in the 21st century, to think about what was done in the 12th century. But why should this be so? Certainly, one aspect of this is the constant appeal Orthodox make to tradition. Appealing to tradition, however, is fraught with difficulty, inasmuch as, little though many of us care to admit it, tradition has changed and continues to change. That is to say, we cannot assume, even with our present advanced states of knowledge about so many aspects of liturgical life in the past, even the distant past, that we are doing exactly what our predecessors did. It would be enough to look at the changes that occurred in the Church's Ordo, as expressed in an arbitrary selection of typica and liturgical manuscripts from the Middle Ages, to realize this. Even if we do not wish to describe it as development, change there certainly was. So if we choose to appeal to tradition, we must do so in the clear knowledge that neither attempting to reproduce exactly something from several hundred years ago, nor retaining fourth-generation photocopies of music that has become unsuitable for present conditions, is a real answer. If, on the other hand, we make decisions that enable our chanters and choir members to sing beautifully and serve the liturgy while continuing to respect traditions, both church-wide and local, we will be genuinely participating in Christ's missionary imperative of baptizing all nations. Thank you.
Is Father Ivan here? Oh, we're getting him. Okay. We have to think really hard about Portugal. We can do this, people. As soon as we get him, you're going to have to applaud once again.
Hello? Hello? Can you...
Aha. Father Ivan. Father Ivan, did you hear the love? Did you hear the love?
I did. Very, very much.
Father Ivan, we've just deeply enjoyed your talk, a talk which reflects such a deep knowledge of church music and its different traditions, and also a very, very deep level of experience as a priest and as one who knows the liturgy and therefore the real context of Orthodox Church music. You included very, very thoughtfully chosen examples from a wide diversity of traditions as well that truly, truly illustrated your point and was an ideal initial talk to set us on a good road in this week-long, few days-long journey of exploration of this theme of music in the service of liturgy. We will have no doubt questions from people here in the room as well as from our virtual audience. People in the room were among the people who were in your musical examples or cited by you, such as Benedict Sheehan, and we heard John Michael Boyer and his ensembles, and we also heard examples of Father Damaskinos Olkinuora, who's our speaker tomorrow. So you've really brought everything together thematically and musically, so we thank you very, very warmly.
Well, thank you very much, and Father and all the organizations of Vladimir. First thing I should do is welcome you on behalf of the ISOCM. The mission of the ISOCM has always been international. Somebody's asking, echo can be eliminated. I would like that too. Is that possible? There's a huge echo.
Is what possible?
To eliminate the echo.
Oh, okay. Oh, feedback loop, okay.
Is this better? Can you hear me still? Okay. Now I can hear you. So I once again thank you for attending this summer institute, this liturgical institute, on behalf of the ISOCM. The mission of the ISOCM has always been an international one, and one of collaboration with other institutions, be they societies, universities, or seminaries, or churches, or cathedrals, or any manifestation of the production, performance, and study of Orthodox Church music. So it gives me great pleasure to be working in collaboration with St. Vladimir's Seminary for this institute. And we have not taken, the ISOCM has not taken a particularly organizational role in this event, partly because it's as Professor Bouteneff said earlier on, it is, and Father Chad too, it is a reinvention of something that already existed. So it's an initiative that already existed at the seminary. Nevertheless, and in fact, because of that reason, ISOCM is very proud to be associated with it and to be involved in it. So that being said, I would like to thank Professor Peter Bouteneff once again for his comments on my really quite wide-ranging opening keynote, and to invite any questions or comments that anyone might have.
Father, can you hear me? It's John Boyer.
John, I can hear you.
How are you? So sorry you're not here in person so we can enjoy all of you, but thanks so much for your talk. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about this repertoire, this collection of repertoire that you've put together for your own parish program, just on a very practical level. Can you say a little bit more about how you incorporate musics from so many traditions within the context of a single service with a single group of singers, and how you manage this sort of cohesion of a service in that sort of context. And also I wanted to say, thanks for putting the video of me directing that ragtag bunch of chanters that we put together a few years ago, and I could do it much better today. All right.
Thank you for the question, which is a very good one. I am aware, very much aware, that liturgical practice composed of different styles of music can be not only not cohesive, but incoherent. I have not found that to be the case. And I should say that generally I have avoided using very elaborate music, except, oddly enough, we have chanters who can sing the Sunday Kanonikon by St. John Kokozelis, as well as a very elaborate Serbian setting. This doesn't faze them, but it has taken time. So, for example, the refrains for the antiphons in liturgy, we have the same music. We have the traditional received tradition Byzantine music for that, and we repeat them in Greek, Slavonic, and Portuguese, and English sometimes as needed. So anything that comes around 3 times is fairly easy to deal with. You just adapt the melody slightly. There's the question of key, of course, of tone, of mode. That hasn't really proved to be a problem either. Once you settle into a key, which is really a question of choir and priest being more or less on the same page, so you know if your priest has a high voice, he's likely to be singing in Western terms the 5th of the scale. So you make your harmony according to that being the highest note of a full triad, or he may be a bass and be singing the tonic of a chord, that kind of thing. But once that's sorted out, and it really is a question of experience and working together, these things I have found work out very well. And I don't sense, I mean, I have to say that we don't use elaborate microtonal ornaments in anything Byzantine. There isn't the structure to do that, though there could be in the future. But it is well sung, and it fits extremely well, as you will know, with Serbian chant, and also with Znameni chant. This is something that, as I said in the lecture, that we've worked out over the course of the years. It's not something that I've imposed. It was born of necessity, but has actually proved to be a very enriching way of serving the liturgy. So it's practically sensible, and it's also, if the last few liturgies I've served, Sunday liturgies I've served, I've come away thinking, gosh, that was beautiful today. And just having the impression of the music enriching the divine liturgy so much and being an organic part of it, even though the styles may vary over the course of the liturgy. I don't know if that answers your question very well, but that's what it is.
Thank you. Father Ivan is Father Chad.
Hello, Father Chad, how are you?
Yes, if you were here, I'd take my glasses off to greet you. That's an inside joke. When you were here on one of your previous visits, you and I had a really very enlightening conversation for me about how Byzantine music, as it's sung by the orphans at the Hogar Rafael Ayau orphanage in Guatemala, has organically changed, and it's taken on a Latin beat. You know, sometimes you want to do a few salsa dance movements, you know, while you're serving the liturgy. I assume that this is just the sort of thing that you're talking about, that we need to adapt in a variety of ways, not only linguistically, but how music is heard and sung in cultural contexts. So if you could maybe say something about resisting the temptation to correct people in different cultural settings that are becoming Orthodox as things to sort of naturally change and adapt to fit a cultural setting.
Yes, we don't have quite that extreme, if I can put it that way, here. The first principle is how you adapt the Portuguese language, or how you adapt the music to the Portuguese language. So that needs to be well done, which means that, and John Michael Boyer knows this very well because he's done so much fantastic work on this in English. How you fit the language to the text is everything. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, if there's a native culture that is very strong musically, and you gave a very good example of Guatemala, but we've all seen, I think, that video of a parish in Kenya, I think it is, and it's a post-Paschal liturgy, and all the local people come in and they're queuing up to receive Antidoron after the liturgy, and there's a Greek priest there with a very sour face, looking at all these wonderful African ladies coming in, doing this shuffling dance, because that's what they do. That's their culture. That's a real cultural encounter, and you find this, of course, in countries in Latin America too. It's not really the case in Portugal. However, I made the point earlier. Ghana, thank you. Somebody's just said this. Kenya, I beg your pardon. I mentioned about not using microtonal ornaments. That's because people haven't grown up in the Byzantine tradition here. And as I said, we have no Greek singers. They just can't sing. They're wonderful parishioners. So it tends to be diatonic singing of Byzantine chant. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nobody complains. It is perfectly accessible to Portuguese people or to any other kind of foreigner who may appear in the parish. And we do have a wide variety of foreigners in this parish.
Father Ivan, I'm just going to point out Maria Rhodes Lebrec's comment through the chat stream. What type of music should a small choir sing? Should that be a tenor, alto, soprano, and a bass, or any other arrangement you can think of?
Oh gosh, well, I wouldn't dare to presume to dictate, but there are so many resources. It depends what language you're using and what kind of tradition you're used to. But there are some wonderful things. I mean, I've forgotten its name, but the two-part website, you know the one I mean? The two-part Orthodox Church music website. There are resources there that you can adapt. And as I mentioned in the lecture, Benedict Sheehan's book, I mean, he makes a point in his introduction of saying how you can work with this chant if you have voices that can harmonize. My starting point would be to go from monophony outwards, but don't go too far outwards if you haven't got the technical resources to do it.
Hi, this is Anne Shep. Hi, Father Ivan.
Hello, Anne.
Good to see you. I just wanted to follow on Father Chad's question. We have a Black priest in our church who's in his 80s, And he says he really still doesn't feel at home in Orthodox music.
Right.
And I know that you guys had some event here at St. Vlad's that had to do with that. And I had a conversation with him. We still need to talk more, him and I, but I asked him, what aspect of music do you feel is missing, or that needs to be there for that community to feel at home? And there's a Black Orthodox conference that happens around St. Louis every year that he goes to. So there is a community that gets together. And he said their music invites movement, which surprised me because I was thinking more gospel harmony. What does it need to have? And to me, that just kind of blew. I see it because of that Kenyan video, and I can see that there, but to me, that it's just so foreign to Orthodox music to have movement. Do you have anything to say? You kind of said some, but just in that particular aspect of it, do you have anything?
Not really. I mean, this is foreign to my experience as well, which is really why I mentioned that particular video, because I think it's one of those. It's lovely to watch, isn't it? When you watch that video, you think this is amazing, and the Greek priest has such a stone face. He's really not enjoying it. But then you think, well, what if this happened in my parish? How would it work? And the answer is, I have no idea. I have no experience with it. So I'm not going to pretend to know about things I don't know about. But I would strongly encourage conversations about this kind of thing. I think the event you're referring to is the Gospel Vespers, was it? Is that right? Is that what you mean?
I don't know. There was some guy singing Amazing Grace and on a video, and I thought it was related to the seminary, but I was like, that's not really liturgical music, so I'm not seeing a connection. But yeah.
Well, anyway,
there was also the improvisatory sort of, aspect of the performance too. But anyway, it's a conversation I'd like to have.
Yes,
I would like.
I think it's a conversation that should be had, and in that sense, I'd like to be part of it as well, because I don't have that experience, and I would be very curious to see. You say it's foreign to you, but presumably, the priest you're referring to, all the other stuff is foreign to him because he's lacking that element that he would expect in worship. So it really needs to be a dialogue and for people to understand each other's points of view.
Yeah, and I think it also more universally just also expresses that need for us to experience Orthodox music in our culture.
Yes.
And even for me as an American, I'm a German, Swedish, Lutheran background, is like, what is my music? Who am I? And as an American, so I think it's a good question for us to all ask.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. Yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much.
You. Actually, just before you ask your question, I just noticed that Deacon Alexander here has said movement and percussion is very much incorporated into the tradition of the Ethiopian and Eritrean Orthodox churches. Yes, indeed it is. But my point is that we are not used to it in the West. That's the whole point. It's a different tradition, and for the same reasons, we would need to work out how those things would work in a, how can I put it, in a Western Orthodox context, or it's not even Western, but I can't find the words, but I think you know what I mean. These things are, they come from their particular traditions, and we don't have exactly those traditions, so they would need to be talked about and worked on, and that would be an important thing to do. So it would be a good thing to have dialogue concerning that as well. So sorry. Next question.
Hi, my name's Elena. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about your pedagogical approach to teaching a choir to sing in a bunch of different styles, and how do you do that in a way that's you kind of maintain the integrity of each tradition, but obviously there's the practical element of, one choir has to sing in multiple different areas.
That's a very good question. I am probably not the best person to answer it, because I'm lucky enough to have singers, chanters who are already very experienced in their different traditions, and tend to have conservatory training and music degrees and all that kind of thing. So I've never done any choral pedagogy in that sense with this choir, or very little. What I have tried to ensure is that there's a seamless transition from one thing to the other. And that really depends on vocal quality, the sound that people make. I mean, you can't have somebody singing an Anisson, for example, with a huge vibrato, as though it were a solo line in Yevgeny Onegin. It's not going to work. You need another approach to it. So there's the real trick, I think, is for everybody in the choir, everybody to think we are all here for the same purpose, and we need to be concentrating on the same thing, which is to make this music work in its context. In other words, for it to sound beautiful, for it to transmit the meaning of the words, for it to elevate the congregation, and for it to be an integral part of the liturgy. So theological rather than technical. However, if you had a larger choir, you might have a challenge on your hands. It would be a more difficult thing perhaps to achieve. I'm talking about a maximum of 7 singers, and as I said, very often fewer than that. So it hasn't been very difficult, but there are challenges in that, definitely. I wouldn't say it was obvious, and that's why I hesitate to recommend a single model for any particular parish. Every parish has its own needs in these matters, and the best way to do things in one parish may not be the best in another.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I'm Erica Dobrinsky, and I'm wondering how we could also have a dialogue with the Protestant stream of music, of sacred choral music, which I grew up in before I became Orthodox. And for me, it was mainly through the Episcopal Church. So of course that's British, European, greatly influenced, but there are also contemporary American composers from the 20th century who contributed to that stream. And I have all this music like living in me that I grew up on, that I drank and ate. And I don't know how to begin to bridge, possibly, because I can hear the bridges sometimes in my head between the Orthodox liturgy and what I grew up in. I can just hear how a piece of music or just even the melody could be incorporated and contribute in a beautiful way. And I don't know how to start that dialogue and with whom, because I'm in a tiny little church that barely lets me conduct. So I don't really know where to begin, but it seems tonight, hearing your talk, that it is all about dialogue and across many streams of sacred music. So I don't know. How do we begin that one? Because a lot of us are Americans, and a lot of converts came from Protestantism, and there are many streams in Protestantism. Orthodox people sometimes tend to like dilute them or reduce them to one stream, which is just not accurate at all. But I'm just laying out that mine was from, the Church of England translated into Episcopalian in this country. So I don't know what my question is. How do we respectfully engage, start some kind of a lively conversation about that within the sacred music, I don't know, people?
Thank you for your question. It's a complicated one. I should point out that before I became Orthodox, when I was 22 or 23, I was an Anglican too. So I have that background. I mean, I know the Anglican and Catholic musical traditions very well. And it took me a little while, I may say, to not to let go of them, but to find a place for them without feeling that I was missing something. Because it became clear to me that if I were going to convert to Orthodoxy, it should be to the Eastern Rite, the full thing. In any case, Western Rite wasn't an option in those days. So, I haven't really felt the lack of the music in Orthodoxy itself. I mean, I love listening to Christmas carols and sung Latin masses and all those things. I've never lost that. Why should one lose it? One doesn't have to. But to make that part of Orthodox worship is very difficult. There have been attempts, and I don't think they've been very successful. I'm not talking about Western Rite parishes here. I have almost zero experience of those, so this is not a critical observation at all in that sense. But I mean, how do we do this? How do we do this? If we have, for example, during communion, what are we going to sing during communion? If you're in one of those churches where you have lots of little pieces sung, which is more common than we like to think, you might think, well, we could sing Talis's "If You Love Me" or Sacrum Convivium, or by a Renaissance Italian composer, or something like that. But it's really, and here we come across that barrier again, that aesthetic barrier. It doesn't really fit. It would stand out. And what we don't want to do in liturgy is to draw attention to things just for the sake of it. If anything is going to have its attention drawn to it, it should be because it is a special moment. Of course, the communion is a special moment. It's the whole point of the liturgy. But for that reason, there are appointed texts for communion hymns. So, well, it might be a nice idea to trot out all these. I mean, and we have the problem in the Orthodox world anyway, the singing of Agni Parthene and so on during the communion, or some Russian or Ukrainian concert during the communion, or some wildly inappropriate text, just because people are filling up time. So if we add an aesthetic complication to that, I think it's really very difficult. But on the other hand, I don't want to discourage you, Erica, from thinking about this. I think the first thing to do is to make peace with it yourself, to find a place which allows you to enjoy your Episcopalian heritage, not to think that you've lost it. You haven't lost it. It's part of you. It's part of your formation as an Orthodox Christian, and you don't need to throw it away.
We have time for one more online and one in-person question, so please.
I'm Ruth Harrell, and I'm presently serving as choir director at St. Barbara in Fort Worth, Texas. I'd like to continue that. I grew up Roman Catholic, and then I was an Episcopal priest for 25 years. And then I went back to the Roman Catholic Church and served as choir director and all of that. And I'd like to address that. I'm
Wow.
also Cuban, so I have this Spanish thing, y puedo hablar español. And so there's a whole lot of music in my heart. And I converted to the Orthodox faith, glory to God. And so now I'm in the Eastern Rite, and there's this whole new world. I feel like I've walked through opening the door into the Wizard of Oz, and it's colorful and it's beautiful and it's so different, and it's a new adventure. And it's not like I've left all of that music behind, because it's part of it. But I bring all the sounds and love of the Lord with me into the Eastern Rite. But in my car, I have to vent. And so I bang on my steering wheel and I play my Cuban music and my salsa. And I listen to my Roman Catholic heritage and the Gregorian chant. And I sometimes cry because I didn't leave it behind, but it's part of my fabric. It's part of my life. It's part of the sounds that I hold in my head. It's part of the harmony that has formed my heart and my love for my Lord Jesus Christ. But now I am working with a choir that also loves the Lord deeply in a liturgy that is so rich and deep and wonderful. And I bring all this talent from a 6-manual pipe organ that I used to play that was magnificent in big churches. And I don't miss playing the organ. I don't, because it's now almost intrusive to bring a keyboard into the sound. The pureness of these voices that I work with, and the beauty and simplicity of the human instrument, the vocal cord, the purity of the child of God, the innocence and purity of that voice and instrument that God made. That's the first thing that God made. That's what I'm working with. And I'm enjoying that, and working with people that don't even know how to read music. So I've gone from this incredible, huge, ginormous instrument to working with people that don't even know how to read music, who love the Lord in such a rich and deep way in the true faith. And I'm learning so much, and it's like so much has been stripped away, but in my car, I listen to praise music, and I listen to Black gospel, and I listen to salsa, and I listen to Episcopal music from being an Episcopal priest, and I listen to Gregorian chant. And yes, I was a Roman Catholic nun too. And yes, and I bring and I can hold all of that in my heart, but I haven't lost it. And then I look at these 7, 8, 9 people that I'm working with, and I love them because they're so dedicated. And you know what? It's all good. It's all great.
Muy bien, eso es que hace parte de ti. Yeah, exactly. You don't need to leave it behind. It's part of who you are, part of your character, part of your formation, part of your personality. And we all bring, every one of us, whether we're converts or not. And somebody once said very wisely, there are no converts because we all have to be converted every day. But we all bring something. We all bring something to liturgical celebration that nobody else can bring. Nobody else has had our particular unique experiences. And those are very valuable to us. You all know that when you go up to receive the communion, the holy body and blood of Christ, that you are addressed by your name. Why is that? It's because we are all individual, and God values us all individually, and he values everything that we bring with us. So let's not forget that we can all contribute in so many different ways with all our rich personal histories to what we are doing in Orthodox worship now.
A last word of thanks for you, Father Ivan, for very, very sensitively and helpfully responding to the questions and comments, which were all lovely. A last word of applause then for you, Father Ivan, and for the whole evening from our group here.